Mindset. Mindset now.
Test. Hello. For millions of individuals, their biggest regret in their life is not saying goodbye to those they love. For millions of young men, their biggest regret is never telling their father that they loved them before he passed on. For the rest of your life, these individuals are left in suspense. They have to guess on these unresolved issues, and they can never gain closure. Our side solves this problem when we inform individuals of when exactly they're going to pass. What is our model? It is simple. On the day of your death at 12 a.m., you get a call that notifies you of your impending death on that day. I want to do some preemption against their case. They will probably say that people will live in constant fear and anxiety awaiting their call that signifies their imminent death, and therefore they will spend their last day unproductively or in a way that isn't going to give them the requisite closure. I want to preempt this in two ways. Firstly, internally as an individual, in a world wherein this has always existed, people know that this death task existed historically and will continue to exist into perpetuity. Therefore, they know examples of individuals, people close to them, celebrities who have undergone this same thing. Therefore, the predisposition or trepidation towards death that exists in status quo cannot be transported into our world because necessarily the social norms around death are different. On our side, there's going to be norms existing around the death task about initial anxiety, but otherwise the desire for you to act on your urges, to do the things that you've never thought to do within that last day, and that is important. But secondly, we talk about external influences that happen when you have a world with the death task. This means norms around how to treat individuals who receive this death task call will exist. Governments and corporations will institute services to counsel, to guide, and to aid these persons. This is because there are strong incentives for these actors to do so. The first is that they probably want to prevent mass hysteria or any form of disruption to public order. But secondly, these people are inherently sympathetic individuals. Think about how we are very nice as a society to cancer patients because we know they're going to die. This is likely going to be similar. Therefore, the effect of these preemptions is to say that the last day of these individuals will not be one of pain and suffering. It will not be one of regret. They will act on the things that they've always wanted to do, and that is productive. Firstly, why this is important for closure and for the management of these individuals' affairs. In the status quo, death is sudden, immediate, and unexpected. You are wasting away from a debilitating disease and then you die. You could potentially be hit by a car and your body is flayed on the side of the road in the most undignified ways imaginable. Although they might say that some deaths are predictable, a huge majority of instances of death are sudden, and therefore the last days of these individuals are spent mundanely because people know that they're going to die. I'll take you later. It looks like sitting in the office and then going home and suddenly getting hit by a car. You never actually spend these days productively because you don't have the epistemic access to know when it is your last day. The second thing is that this is an incredibly important form of closure to accord to individuals. Affording persons the autonomy to determine how they will die is important because people care about the narrative of their life. They care about their personhood that continues after their body has left the physical or mortal realm. This is why people give directives about how they want to be buried, where they want to be buried, whether they want to be burnt or cremated, etc., etc. Therefore, you should believe that people on our side of the house can determine how they die. This is because, I'll take you later, people who are unsure of what their death entails or what it is caused by, but can deduce that it's probably something bad. So for instance, if you're a young person and you know you have no pre-existing medical conditions and you receive the call, you probably know it's because of some freak accident that happened that's completely unexpected and it's probably not the way you want to pass. Therefore, you can return autonomy to this individual by allowing them to choose to euthanize themselves prematurely. This, therefore, is a last act of autonomy. It is a last act of defiance against the fate that has cruelly stripped you of your life way too early. This is important. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
Does the fact that an institution is long-standing mean that the norms surrounding it are good?
Not that the fact that it's existed long means the norms are good. It is that it's existed long, therefore people have this expectation, but simultaneously people are uniquely sympathetic, and that's why the norms surrounding this thing will necessarily be good. Secondly, on why it's important to settle your affairs properly, to say goodbye to your loved ones well, to settle petty grudges and to pass with no regrets in life. In status quo, people are arrogant, they are avoidant of death, they never want to contemplate the day that they will die. Why is it important to know when you will die and act on certain things? Firstly, it's important for estate planning. Your funds, your property, your heirlooms, things that matter to you, you can decide how they will be divided amongst your children or your loved ones. But importantly, this represents an extension of the presence of yourself in the life of your loved ones. You can continue to make sure that they are properly cared for. You can instruct the executor of your will to ensure that funds are saved for your daughter's university education. These are things that are important to individuals because they can care for their loved ones even once they pass. The second thing, therefore, is that cherishing your relationships, reaching out to those that you've alienated for reasons unimportant in the grand scheme of life, is something that is important. Saying things that you've never felt the need to say, thanking your parents for their sacrifice, apologizing for instances where you messed up terribly. These are things that are uniquely important to these individuals. In the status quo, you feel too much inertia to say these things, you end up never communicating them, and therefore you leave these open gaping wounds in your soul that never close, and then you pass and you can't do anything about it. What is the impact on this round? People and your loved ones can grieve you, but you cannot grieve yourself. Our side gives the person the opportunity to say goodbye to their mortal life and to grieve the person that they are. It is not, these people don't get to be existent at their own funeral where people celebrate their life and accomplishment. On our side, you do the things that you've always put off, the goals and the wishes of enjoying life, the goals that you slave away in a corporate job in order to achieve. This is important for these individuals because it gives them ownership and autonomy over their life. When you look back at the mark you left on the world and the lives of those individuals around you, that is something that cannot happen on their side of the house where people pass without knowing it. The knowledge that you are going to pass is uniquely the prerequisite for you gaining tons of autonomy on our side of the house that extends past your mortal life, and that is something that we're so proud to propose.
I thank you again for your speech, and now to begin the case for opposition, I call upon Hello.
Hi. Okay, fairly simple speech. Firstly, I'll start with my rebuttals. Then I'll run two mechanisms and two arguments about why both sides create misery. In their word, both it creates misery anyhow. Alright, starting with some rebuttals. The first rebuttal is that they say because the way the vote is now that everyone knows that it's already shaped by the death cast, right? They will cope with it. But simply, the fear of death is a universal feeling. It's a natural instinct of humans, right? And it's unaffected of just knowing that you'll die. And when we know that we are going to die, even in the status quo, we are still scared, right? Even if we know that tens of thousands of people die every day. That's why people are still scared of cancer. Okay, second argument about they said that the return of autonomy. Okay, simply autonomy discussion does not exist in this debate. This debate is about question about which vote we prefer, right? Not about choosing to give someone a technology that already exists and will exist in either scenario. In a vote without a death cast, this is just people pass and there's nothing you can do to change it. And simply, it is genuinely unclear why the manner of death in an accident is so undignifying. You're dead, man. There's no autonomy left. And it's unclear why suicide is somehow more dignifying than accidents. And the loss of autonomy from sudden death comes from the death, not the manner of it. Moving on to substantives. Very simple. First, unexpected death creates misery. Second, unexpected death also creates misery. Okay. Moving on to the unexpected part. Okay, two layers, actually more than 2 layers, I lost count. Okay. Hold on. And firstly, most cases is of unexpected death is in which a person who is not expecting to die, they're totally healthy, right? And he's suddenly told that he's gonna die that day. The ways that they will react will bring them immense grief and suffering for many reasons. Firstly, and the anticipation of dread and pain. They will spend that whole day wondering if you are going to die pinned under a car, or like pinned under the wheels of a car, or like shot by a criminal that suddenly escaped from prison. And many of these ways of dying don't involve long-term pain. But the very knowledge and concern of dying will consume your last moments. The last moments will be filled with abject terror instead of ignorant death. Okay. Secondly, the regret. Alright, you are suddenly unexpectedly told it is your last day. And hence, you're trying to settle your moral credit scores in that simple 24 hours. You'll apologize to everyone in that day that you want to do so. For example, the example you give. You want to apologize to your father that you didn't tell them when you were 5-year-old all the way until you're 30-something that you didn't love them. And you're trying to write a will, you'll say your final goodbyes to everyone in your extended family, your 5th aunt, your 6th cousin. And the problem with this is that doing all of these in practice is simply going to be impossible. A few reasons for this. Firstly, many of the bad things in life cannot be corrected in 24 hours. For example, you're in an estranged relationship with your parent, right? And maybe you have planned to heal those wounds over a period of time. But simply calling them in the 24 hours and saying sorry because you know you're going to die is simply not good enough. Alright, because of this, a short conversation cannot restore all those broken bonds of trust. Secondly, if you are having this conversation because you are about to die, and they know that, right? Hence, it's much less effective. And people will know that you are coerced into doing it because you know that you have no time left. And hence, they also know that this is not a priority in your normal life, and hence will be ineffective. Thirdly, right, the sheer number of things that you have to do to fix is simply more than you can do in 24 hours. What's the impact of this? In the last 24 hours, you're simply filled with blind panic and fear, but also crushing regret.
Because 24 hours is not a lot of time, that's why you wouldn't try to call every single aunt you have, but rather prioritize the aunt that you love the most.
No, but simply trying to solve all those broken bonds is the panic that causes in itself is the reason why people will struggle to do all those, because they have to worry about many things at once and hence are unable to complete all of them. Okay, thirdly, you might engage in futile attempts to avoid death, right? A few examples of this. You might withdraw from the outside world. You lock yourself in safe rooms in the hope that nobody sees you and hence you will magically not die. And thirdly, you will isolate yourself from anyone that's trying to harm you. So basically every single human being on this planet. And for example, for more conspiratorial people will spend their last day totally alone. And fourthly, you may become open to actors that will prey on your desperation to exploitation. For example, you might contract with services that try to keep you alive, you pay vast sums of money to a legal firm that say that they will write your will for you, but not tell you that the default way to distribute your money after you die is already good enough. Okay, moving on to the second mechanism, anticipated deaths, right? So for example, they're on their deathbeds and they're incubated. So in the status quo, family members know that you might not have long to live. And because they do not know when this person is going to pass, they will have a strong incentive to keep up regular contact, visit them in the hospital every day, ask them about how they're feeling, and to treat them with kindness, because you know that in yourself, you do not know which day will be their last. But now you have a permission structure which allows you to neglect their well-being, because it will rationalize lack of regular contact by saying, oh, well, we all know what day and when it's going to happen. So they will go down to the hospital the day that they die and have that last conversation to get that closure, to make yourself feel good. But to be very clear, we are not saying that you can actually get that closure. We are saying that you will rationalize it on the basis of the last conversation. Okay, why is this bad, right? Because simply, the elderly will feel the last few months of their lives feeling lonely and sad. Okay, let me summarize what I said. Essentially, we said that in both scenarios, one unexpected and one expected. Both scenarios where the individual will suffer because of the fact that you are trying to achieve everything that you regretted in your life that day, and for the anticipated people, and for the unexpected people, and for the anticipated people, you know that the people around you won't care about you until the very day that you will pass away, and you spend the last few months of your lives thinking, when is my family going to visit you, thinking that when is my son, which I contributed all my money and my love when I was young, when is he going to visit me, and is he only going to visit me when I'm about to die, and hence never been bothered to propose.
Take the alone for a seat and continue the case composition here.
Hello. Life is a series of long goodbyes that starts the day you are born. It's a series of birthday parties where we say goodbye to our youth, graduation ceremonies where we say goodbye to our friends and those we consider basically our family. Ceremonies of, for example, the last majors where we say goodbye to our debate friends, possibly not seeing them for months if not years at a time. But it seems quite, every time we miss any one of them is a tragedy. Yet, for some reason, the biggest goodbye of all, our own funeral, is something we are just not around for. We as human beings deserve good deaths. It is an inherent part of human dignity, an inherent part of seeing ourselves as separate from animals that can be slaughtered and die at will. Therefore, it is an absolute tragedy that arbitrary factors of biology strip us of this right as people. Death Cast restores it. Two questions in this speech. Firstly, on how this world will see death. Secondly, on how people react on their last day. Firstly then, on how people see death. This team assumes that because we currently fear death now, we will always fear it into the future, including in this world. But we will suggest that the reason why we fear death now is largely arbitrary and due to external social factors. This is because in the status quo, we ignore death, push it away, seclude the dead in hospitals and wards and graveyards, do not allow the figure of death to infringe upon our neat comforts of life. We fear that which we do not know, which we do not see, which is foreign and alien to us. For millions of years, people considered death a normal part of life. During medieval times, for example, when dead bodies were more common, people viewed death as just another part of life, and we do not have the alienness, foreignness, and fear that we engage with death with now. But what happens when this technology exists? In this world, people are repeatedly and constantly exposed to and reminded of death. They get calls from their loved ones saying, "Today is my day." They see interviews from other people whose day it is, talking about their experiences. They imagine this day constantly, just the same way you imagine your wedding, the same way you imagine your graduation ceremony, the same way you imagine your last debate majors. This is just a fact of life that is always in the minds of individuals in this world because they are constantly and repeatedly exposed to it. Death is as common as graduation ceremonies in this world. Why then, is this a good thing? No. Anyway, why is this then an inherent good thing? We neglect the reality that life is precious and life is sacred. We assume that the loved ones around us will always be with us. We don't talk to them enough. We don't spend enough time with them. We devote ourselves to meaningless things like work and earning more money without realizing that these things are fleeting and temporary. The fear of death gives us life, makes lives of us all. It reminds us that we ought to cherish the time we have in this limited world. In the status quo, the fact that we push it away means that we never cherish those who love us and whom we love. But there is a second and more directly debate-related thing that this means. This means that their case holds no water. They assume that people in this world act in the way that people in our current world would react upon getting this call. That is clearly deeply untrue. This is a world where people are reminded and internalize the idea that death is a natural part of life. That fear and paranoia you feel is just something that you are less likely to feel if you genuinely imagine and constantly internalize that it isn't. No. This therefore means that, number one, this is the independent path to victory for our team. The fact that people live better and more meaningful lives. But number two, their case is just dead. Second thing in this debate on what this means for people on their last day. This team assumes that people will freak out on their last day, that individuals are going to be deeply fearful and therefore exploited. I have three responses to this. Firstly, there are massive state incentives to prevent this. Think about it. Think about the range of services that can and will be provided to these individuals. Last day planning services, where therapists and government officials will talk to you what will happen on this day. Last day curriculum in schools, where it will probably be mandatory to teach you about what a last day includes, the same way we explain to students what weddings include, for example. Last day therapists who are trained with essentially talking to people on their last day. There is going to be an entire science built around giving people comforting and dignified deaths. This team says that while you're so afraid, you'll be exploited by corporations. Just think about how deeply scummy it would be to do this. Think about how you would act if your lawyer was found out to be a person from a corporation like this. Just feel it in your bones. No one would ever allow these people to receive licenses, to receive clientele. The possibility of such a scandal is devastating to any corporation. Yes.
People get diagnosed with stage 4 cancer every day. Do you think people have stopped fearing the diagnosis that they have stage 4 cancer?
So obviously that's a massively different thing, for the very simple reason that this call lets you know exactly what's going to happen and encourages you to act in particular ways, reaching out to people, reminding them of death. There's a certain thing you can do with regards to this call. And beyond that, everyone gets this call. You don't know whether you'll get stage 4 cancer one day. You might get stage 1 cancer, you might not get cancer at all, you might be hit by a car. This universality allows for government policy, allows for economies of scale that generate private services catered to these individuals. That's just not responsive to our case, clearly then. But beyond that, this is just therefore a powerful thing that people get. What are our benefits? I think that this team is going to try and do something interesting in terms of creating something they can trade off. You cannot trade this off. You cannot trade off the fact that people deserve dignified ends of their lives. How do I know this? In the status quo, it would be more profitable and utilitarian for me to harvest the organs of every corpse of people in this room. It is still immoral because you deserve a bookend to your life. You deserve to be there at your own funeral, to hear the things that you will never hear, that the people around you love you, that you love them back, that people die never having heard. It is arbitrary that we die so suddenly and so brutally. You deserve to control the way you die. No one should end their lives splayed out on a sidewalk. We would much rather have them die in an infirmary with euthanasia. This is an inherent part of control and autonomy that separates us from animals. This team reduces people to animals. It reduces people to corpses on the street. It reduces people who never know that they are loved and whose loved ones never know love them.
We deserve good deaths. We agree. The death counts make that possible. 3 issues. 1, this massively increases the fear of death, flips their argument. Secondly, why the norms and institutions which emerge around this death thing are going to be incredibly exploitative and make people miserable. And lastly, on the elderly and expected deaths, a very important point they had absolutely no response to, but one of the most vulnerable actors in this debate. First, why does it massively increase the fear of death? Observation 1. The fear of death is biologically programmed because a creature which does not have a fear of death cannot pass on its genes and cannot evolve. That's why even though death has been with us for as long as we've been alive, we still fear death. 2. They say the problem is that the status quo death is hidden. The vast majority of deaths on both sides are still hidden. They will still be happening in hospitals, in care homes, in circumstances which are invisible to everyone. So it's not like we're seeing death all around the place. 3. if you get an unexpected notification of death, you then now think, I'll probably die in a way which is very painful. A car accident, being shot, crime. Pain is something you will fear because it is in the definition of pain for it to be bad. You can't normalize that feeling, and the anticipation of that feeling is still going to be incredibly bad. And not all of this, by the way, just totally neutralizes their arguments. Here is why you make it actually worse. We think that reminding people that unexpected and painful death can happen makes them more fearful. Not only in the instance where you anticipate that death coming, where you otherwise wouldn't anticipate it and undergo the psychological agony, it makes everyone else around you live a more fearful life. Here's a very common sense example. You live in a violent area in Brazil, right? Favela. You see people constantly being shot around you. You see the death. Do you then go, well, since people are regularly shot in favelas, I no longer fear being shot in a favela? No, that possibility is now made much more vivid and much more visceral and will occupy your life in a much more terrible way. Oh, by the way, just and if someone knows the time, give me a signal. I didn't bring my phone. Thank you, Keithan. Good sportsmanship. So we need to actually make the fear of death way more worse, right? Like, the way to try to get around it is saying, but the alternative is that everyone will just have euthanasia. If you want someone to write a will, call everyone, and then contract with a clinic for euthanasia in a certain amount of time, that's fairly unrealistic. That requires a huge amount of money. You might not even get around to it. More to the point, in most countries, euthanasia is illegal because people also consider it suicide. It's incredibly religious and ethically controversial. Many people will think that the corporations who will benefit from the euthanasia are exploiting you in the exact same way. In most countries, we don't even allow euthanasia for actually terminally ill suffering people. So the alternative that euthanasia will happen by default is incredibly unrealistic. Death, fear, more, bad. Second point, why is it that the norms which will emerge around this actually make people unhappy? They say, essentially, if the institution has been around for a long time, things will become better. We'll find ways to make it good for you. The norms which will emerge will be the norms which are the most persuasive to people in a desperate state of mind. Who is going to shape these norms? What's going to shape these norms? The forces of capitalism, the forces of religion, the forces of misogyny. What that means, thank you. What that means is that you are now the prime target for exploitation. Here's the thing, all exploitation works by creating a desire in you and telling you that you must do something before you die. So, think about the therapeutic and counseling industry. Its incentive is going to be to tell everyone to maximize profit. You need to settle all your issues. You need to make all these calls. But in the process of it marketing its services that way, it tells you, it raises your expectations for what you ought to do in the first instance. And that raising of expectations both makes you more unhappy and anxious, but also makes those expectations harder to fulfill. The other side says, but then you just prioritize the people you love the most. Prioritizing who you love the most is in itself an intensely traumatic and painful process. Like, which child do you call first? Which loved one do you apologize to? More to the point, what if they're at work? What if they're on a flight? What if it's the wrong time zone? What if they don't pick up? That horror, that terror, that having to decide that certain people matter less is an incredibly traumatic process fueled by capitalism and exploitative forces, which you wanted to go through on our side. Think about religion. Religion's going to tell you, you got to confess all your sins, right? You now need to find the nearest priest and detail everything which you have done badly. Women will be told, your job uniquely as women, because you are loyal to family first and foremost, is to prioritize doing that over other duties which you might have. But every single one of these norms puts in you a desire with a level of intensity you would not otherwise have had. That's why the most enduring institutions in our society, institutions like marriage, institutions like corporations, have been associated with exploitation. And the easiest people to exploit are the ones who are desperate. And it's very hard to hold them to account as well, because there are two arguments, all of these exploitative industries, two arguments you make. They say, oh, it's very scummy. Scumminess is the default state of humanity, bro. So, number one, they will say, well, we had so little time to make this person do something. You couldn't have expected us to explain every single legal nicety about how the will made. We just said we've got wills number 1 to 7, choose a default, right? This person's got priorities. They can get away with it by saying this person had no time. But the second thing is, once a person is dead, there's often no one else who can sue on their behalf, right? The family is not going to do it in many instances because they will think that something was done which actually helped them, but it did not in fact do that. Yeah, go for it.
So, what you're explaining is why our process is not perfect. Explain why having no process at all is a lot better. Why
Or is it to say goodbye to too many people is a bad thing as compared to not saying goodbye to anyone?
Two comparatives. Number one, because you will not know. In many cases, when the death is sudden, you will have less time to feel the awful regret. And I'm going to be very brutal here, it's because when you're already under the wheel of the car, you're going to be dead in half an hour. So you might have half an hour of regret, you have X number of hours before death time of regret. Two, the intensity of the regret is also different, because these exploitation forces, because they know this mechanism exists, will be able to anticipate and exploit it. So the expectations they place on you will be commensurately so much more high and brutal. So we think actually you'll be exploited. Last, we told you that in many instances, not knowing when someone is going to die, in the majority situation actually, like someone in hospice care, someone who is really on the ventilator, someone who is really receiving palliative care, you already know they're going to die at some point. You don't know exactly when. You've been incented to treat every day as if it is their last. That means you visit them in the hospice regularly, you treat them with kindness, you bring them a fruit basket, you bring them their favorite DVDs and TV shows to watch. This is an insanely vulnerable group. And my first speaker told you, if you know when they're going to die, there is a permission structure. It is easier to make an excuse and not visit them. It is easier to put off the difficult visit after a long day of work. It is easier to focus on the mundane details of your life because you tell yourself, and this might not be true, but you tell yourself, at least I will have those 24 hours. This hurts people, this exploits people, and it makes death worse. Applause.
I thank Yellow for the speech and continue the case for government.
NYP! NYP!
Testing. Is this okay? I don't talk about this often or to anyone really, but every now and then when I'm alone in my room and I'm alone with my thoughts, I think about the day my favorite person in this world passed away, who is my mother. I get so caught up with university and with work and debate competitions like this one that by the time I reach home, she's asleep, and when I wake up in the morning, she has already left the house. If my mom got this text tonight, side opposition says that she'll react in panic and she'll react in fear. But my mom is a brave woman, and she'll confront death with a bold face. And we will have lunch at Pizza Hut at Kovan, where we used to go to when I was in primary school, where we will go visit her sisters and brothers, who she hasn't seen in years because she was too busy with work and raising a family. And we will eat dinner at the ramen store in Nix, where she comforted me when I failed my prelims in secondary school. This world gives people the opportunity to say goodbye. The last I love you, the last good night, the last I'm sorry. And this team severely underestimates how important these last moments are to people. There are millions of people in this world that are haunted by the fact that they never got to say that last goodbye. That last 3 words, the final time they could say I love you, the final time they could hear their mother's voice on the phone. Millions of people never get that, and they carry that baggage around with them for the rest of their life. So when Ashish says, you wouldn't know because you will be dead already, my question is, what about the people you leave behind? Your life is not just about yourself, it's about the connections you make, your children, your wife, your friends, and those people deserve to hear your voice for the last time. For me to say I'm sorry, and for me to say I love you. The first thing they say is people will panic. The human spirit is not so weak. Many terminally ill patients who know that they are about to die choose to go out with dignity, to face death with bravery, so that their family's final memory of them will be that they left this world in courage. Panic might be an initial reaction, but this team does not have enough analysis to explain why the panic will persist for 24 hours. Being anxious for 24 hours is just incredibly tiring. At some point, the rational mind kicks in, and you would realize this is my last chance to make amends, my last chance to tie up loose ends, and I should make the most of my final moments. We know people ought to know when they are about to die because we tell cancer patients when they are going to die. If this team is correct, that we ought to just let people fizzle out of this world randomly. Why do we tell cancer patients you have 2 months left? Why do we spend millions of dollars on research trying to approximate the exact hour in which a person died? Why do we write on the death certificate of individuals the exact hour and second in which they passed away? It is because these things are important to us. That is why we tell them when they are going to die, because knowing when they are going to leave this world constitutes a part of dignity. Then they say, well, you fear that the death is going to be violent. You fear that you get shot, you fear that you get knocked down by a car. This ignores Rhea's robust setup about how the norms around this world are likely to develop. It is the case that humankind for centuries have realized that the death cast is inevitable. They're not going to expend energy trying to fight it or trying to escape it. If for centuries, generations of humankind have confirmed the fact that death cast is inevitable and inescapable, that means that you know that the outcome is out of your control. When you know that you cannot control the outcome, then you are going to look for the things in which you have actual agentic control over, like talking to your friends, like spending the final moments doing the things that are important to you. So no, you're not going to spend the last moments just anxious in your room alone. Then they said, well, there's not enough time to do everything you want. And we told you that it was a good thing. We told you that the limited 24 hours reveals to people what is actually important to them. Because we go about our daily lives too worried about work, too worried about our grades, too worried about what other people think with us. It is the text that says 24 hours left that makes you realize and it brings to the surface of your mind who are the people that are actually important to you. So it is the limitedness of the time that's important in helping people make important decisions. It reveals our mortality to us. But then they say under this, but when you have to make choices, it's really traumatic. When you have to think about which aunt you want to call, that's really traumatic. This has always to be weighed against doing absolutely nothing. Because at least calling a few aunts, at least calling a few people would be better than in the last 30 minutes of your life, realizing you had no time to call anybody at all, and all of your loved ones haunted by the fact that they never got to talk to you for that last time. Then they said, well, people will want to wait for the text to spend time with their parents, so all the children will neglect their parents because the parents didn't get a text. They don't prove the comparative. In status quo, where we do not know when our parents are going to die, we don't make time to call or meet them right now because we're too busy with capitalism and we're too busy with our studies. The next time many people meet their parents is at their funerals, unfortunately. But also, people might think that their parents will get a text tomorrow, so they won't neglect their families. Because if your parent is really old or ill, you would be afraid that maybe they're not getting the text today, but they might get the text tomorrow. So the death cast will be culturally significant enough that makes people intentional about the way they perceive life. Before I move on, PY.
What exactly about that 30-second phone call and the things that you say in it? Like, suggest to me what exactly you're saying that 30-second phone call of goodbye that radically changes your feelings after a person has passed.
It doesn't change your feelings, it changes their feelings, the people who remain. And for many people, these things are deeply important to them. Now I want to deal with the debates that I think is less, the parts of the debates that are a bit less sophisticated. They say that companies will exploit people who are about to die. Firstly, dying people are a highly vulnerable group that are incredibly politically sympathetic. It's likely to have strong protections around it, and also because your family can sue the company if they exploit you afterwards. But to flip this argument, it is because 24 hours is a limited time that corporations will make it as quick and easy as possible to settle things like your wills and inheritance, so it frees up time for you to do other more important things like spend time with your family. Then they say, well, the fear of death is biologically programmed, therefore people will always have the fear of death. The response to this is that we can socialize people out of this fear. This is a purpose, a world's motion, so the norms will develop around the way the death cast is culturally significant. For the same reason that we are able to socialize people out of emotions like lust or anger, we can similarly socialize people out of the fear of death. Because the norms around the society and the norms that are developed by the society constrain the way in which we interact with our emotions. Therefore, if there's a strong historical precedent of people experiencing the death cast and spending their time well, if there are support structures that are built up in this new world, as Rhea explains to you, where there's counseling, where there's an understanding, where there are rituals surrounding your last day on this earth, it's unlikely that the fear of death is going to dominate, because you can't view the fear of death in isolation. You have to compare it to all the other structures that you exist in within society, where there's counseling, where there's the fact that you've seen other people have their final day and have used this to inform the way in which you want to spend your final day as well. So the extent of analysis we get is that it's biological in nature, but clearly that's not sufficient to respond to the setup already existing in Rhea. For all of those reasons, the main outcome in this debate is that people get to be at their funerals, and that's important.
Then there's halfway to the speech, and they continue the debate upward.
question. Can we get rid of the fear of death? And I just want you guys to think about how the entirety of human civilization has just been an unending quest by humanity to cheat the final payment of death. Everything that humanity has ever created, including religion, including superstition, including weapons, including empires, have been meant to cheat death. That's how much we fear it, and that's how long it has existed. I'm not entirely certain where on earth the government is getting the idea that seeing more dead bodies on the road has made people inured to the fear that they are going to disappear from the face of this earth forever. Just gut check yourself on instinct for that particular argument. The second thing that I want to talk about is the vast majority of deaths that have occurred in expected ways actually perfectly symbolizes the world that they claim is so different, because we are already surrounded by death. There are hospices everywhere you look. There are hospital beds where people are struggling to take their last breath. Everyone knows someone who has died at some point. It's not to say that dying in this world is something that only ever happens suddenly. In fact, the vast majority of deaths happen in a protracted fashion and in a visible fashion. By that logic on their side, the fear of death should have disappeared by now. But what do we see? We see people emptying their life savings on moonshot treatments for rare diseases and cancer in order to live just one more year. We see people signing up their own life insurance to be able to pay to keep a relative on a ventilator with no chance of ever being revived. We see people going to the church every single day even though they can barely walk, because they want to know that there is an afterlife, so that the concept of actually disappearing does not exist. I am unclear why, because you know you're going to die, because yet somehow in their world we didn't know. Shocker, you're going to die one day. Suddenly that fear is going to disappear. Recognizing that fear, that becomes the premise of a lot of other arguments. I want to turn my attention to some other principles. Dignity. This is a weird argument. They claim we need to restore autonomy, and the comparison is a world in which that dignity is possible versus a world where it's impossible. Therefore, the world that's possible is better. I want to examine what dignity is, because this word is doing a lot of linguistic lifting here. The concept of dignity is the idea that you live a life that is acceptable to you in terms of the quality of that life and the choices that you make. What this means is you can live with dignity, you cannot die with it. At the point at which you are dead, the state of your body does not materially affect you at all. And so if you are dying suddenly, that suggests that that concept of that loss of dignity does not exist because you were not aware of it. Ironically, the other side creates that loss of dignity because you know you're going to die and you feel that last 24 hours with so much anxiety that you have created that undignified process of dying. You can't just say autonomy and dignity and not explain why those things are important to the individual if I don't know that my body is actually going to be destroyed later on. Third and last thing, let's talk about this emotional point, right? The idea of final goodbyes. And I know that this might sound confronting, but genuinely speaking, oftentimes the regret of not being able to say that final goodbye is actually just a manifestation of what you thought that relationship could be. The reason why you wanted that final goodbye is because you have a fantasy in your mind that that last 30 minutes, that last 1 hour that you could have spent with that person could have fixed that relationship completely. Newsflash, it cannot. If, for example, you have been estranged from your parents, I can guarantee you that 1 hour is not going to fix the years of trauma they have created within you. And it's not going to give you the illusion that you can either. The reason why people think that not being able to say goodbye, or feel that regret when they couldn't say goodbye, is because they think that that could have happened and they don't have to confront the reality that it wouldn't. Yes?
Isn't then this delusion, this self-doubt, this uncertainty really an awful thing to force hundreds and millions of people to live with?
They live with it right now. And I'm just about to explain the comparative about why that delusion is there. So not here, I'm not saying that in the absence of the delusion, you now have perfect relationships with everyone because they were able to call you to tell you that everything was fine and they really actually loved you. Here's what actually happens. You have that conversation. That person's irrational. They know they're going to die. They are emotional. They're saying things that perhaps they wouldn't ordinarily say, but doesn't necessarily mean they reflect anything more authentic about themselves. It is the words of a dying man. At the end of the 1 hour, instead of the so-called delusion that you speak of an arbitrary potential resolution that could have had, you now have a much more tangible idea of what could not be fixed. And the what could have been of what you could have done in that relationship for the rest of the life that person actually had the time becomes tangible and not theoretical. We argue that some regrets are much bigger than others. Last argument, and here's where this is where our team really shines. We're going to talk about the concrete impacts to individuals and why it makes dying specifically worse. Now, number one, I want to talk about exploitation because I think this is actually really crucial. If you look at what kind of world is likelier to become, you note that their side does, again, a lot of heavy lifting on the idea that dying people are an extremely sympathetic lot and therefore will create structures to protect them. I'm not saying that there are no good people in this world. There's palliative care, there's hospices, there are counselors. But if we just take a look at the way that the world is structured right now, it seems to suggest that that's not likely the case. So we have lawyers, for example, charging an arm and a leg for you to create wills that are excessively detailed, for instance, and they have no qualms about taking that money out of your final will and testament for their fees. We see people like religions, for example, exploiting that fear of death consistently, especially when you're near your deathbed, for you to donate more money to the church. We see, for example, cancer research institutes forcing you to pay an arm and a leg so that you have a better shot at being able to survive something. We see like fake witches on Instagram or whatever telling you they can solve your problem for just, $7, $8, $25,000. Clearly, the exploitation does occur. But also crucially, I think Ashik gives you analysis for why these are things that are likely going to be solidified and legal precisely because of that idea that a person should be able to live out and complete their last will of testament, some concept of autonomy, and generally capitalistic sentiments like this in the guise of something that's better for that person tends to become legal. Finally, I do think that oftentimes it's a massive taboo also to talk about the exploitation of a person who's already dead, and that's why it's hard to actually analyze this. The last thing that we then wanted to talk about was why this is worse for the people who are going to die. And their argument was strange. They said, well, you never know if they're going to get the text tomorrow, so you go visit them today. Yeah, that's what they do now. Because you don't know when they're going to die tomorrow, so you visit them today, and tomorrow, and the day after, until the day they actually die. On their side, because it is so difficult to confront the fact that a person is going to die, you don't visit them every day, and then they die on their last day without you being able to say their goodbye. We oppose.
I think that's if an opposite, and wrap up the case of the opposition of reply.
Three questions. The elderly, actually the vast majority of deaths in this debate, also the deaths they didn't engage with that much. Secondly, the fear of death, and lastly, exploitation. First, the elderly. We told you that currently, when you don't know when your loved ones will die in hospice care or when they're literally on their deathbed, you visit them more often because you do not know when the last moment will be, and you want to make sure it's meaningful. Their response was, well, but currently people already don't visit their loved ones on their deathbeds. Yes, but this debate is a comparative. The knowledge that you do not know when they will die and that you might miss that moment of death, or they might be very alone in that moment of death, means you're more likely to visit them a lot more often. So that response never actually dealt with the logic of our claim. They said, you're more intentional. Show me tells you that we are already intentional because a doctor tells you they will die soon. You are very aware of when they will die. That is what actually makes you visit them. So for the vast majority of people, they now give people who are already harried by capitalist forces, who are already harried by jobs and families, they give them a perfect excuse to neglect some of the most vulnerable people in these debates, in care homes and in deathbeds. I think that's a clash which would win very clearly for an extremely large number of people. Secondly, on the fear of death. The problem with this, as the repeater pointed out, is that they were just insufficiently comparative. Clearly, the argument couldn't be premised on the knowledge that death happens, right? Like, everyone knows that they will die. So the argument had to be just about why knowing the time of death means that you don't fear that death. But we told you that can't make sense. Because if you are perfectly healthy, if I'm told that I will die today, it must be something which is pretty awful and sudden and unexpected and painful. Even in their world, only a very small minority of people, by definition, will be subject to unexpected death. It will still always be a freakish thing, as we pointed out. And if that means I'm more afraid of dying in a way which is painful, which involves getting shot, being in a car accident, having something fall on me, Looney Tunes style, We still fear all those specific processes of dying which instill fear of pain. What you then do is therefore you back-propagate that pain from what would otherwise be a very fleeting moment of terrible, excruciating suffering, and that will consume your entire day. So you increase the fear of death. And we also tell you, just sense check this. Does telling someone they're about to die when it's so deeply embedded in our moral psyche, in our evolutionary instincts, makes us fear it less? Right? I genuinely don't think people stopped fearing death because when they were being marched to the gas chamber, as he said, they just gave up agency. Knowing something is inevitable doesn't make you feel good. It can often make you feel terrible and powerless and face off that brutal fact. They never dealt with the comparative. Now let's talk about exploitation. They said you get autonomy, you get choice, you get to be at your own funeral. Except of course, your funeral arrangements were made by other people. Those other people happen to be called the counseling industry, the legal industry, religion, capitalism, patriarchy. Now their response was to say, we can regulate all of this away. That misses our argument. Our argument was not they will do legally problematic things. Our argument is that the norms embedded in society already will naturally apply to you way more strongly. Because, for instance, look, and their case requires the mechanisms of exploitation to work. Their whole argument was that industries will come up to help you with this. Religions will know this is going to happen. Yes, and in the process of trying to help you cope with these things, they will try and extract as much as they can for you. The problem is not legal. There's no threshold where you're like, you told this person to care about the sins in the afterlife a bit too much. That's not a legal problem. It's a moral problem embedded in the structure of society and the forces which manipulate us. This is not autonomy, this is not choice, this is not dignity. What do they expect you to do on that last day? Write a will, hand over life projects, go for counseling, arrange for euthanasia, apologize to your loved ones, and then do all your religious confessions. How? How are you supposed to do that? Why are we letting people become manipulated into thinking these are the things they need to go through? When they inevitably fail, they will suffer more because you raise the expectations only to dash them upon one brutal fact of impending non-existence. We are incredibly proud judgments.
Thank the speaker for their speech, and to wrap up the final support, I call upon Prof. Reply.
Hello? I will first answer the question of what this last day would likely look like. This team assumes that this last day will be an awful endeavor, one filled with fear, anxiety, and psychosis. One where you're being rushed basically by like 5 different corporations, all trying to shove a plan in your face, all trying to extract as much value as possible from you, and on the 6th, behind them is your priest or something. This is an unlikely picture of what this type of world looks like for a couple of reasons we provided down the bench. The first is just that in the status quo, there are massive stigmas around exploiting people we know are dying. Now, to be clear, this means that right now, systems are imperfect. There are some people who exploit people who are dying. There are some hospitals who are scummy. There are some priests that are scummy. But gut check this. Is this the majority? Is the average hospital scummy? The average priest scummy? The average person encountering a dying person scummy? The reality is no, because in our world, as in this world, we treat the dead and dying with immense reverence and respect. This team assumes the worst of humanity because there are some people who exploit people sometimes. This was not our burden. We never had to prove that every single person in this world would have an amazing last day. All we had to prove is that on balance, this last day is a dignity that people ought to be accorded, that people's loved ones ought to be accorded. This means then that given the numerous mechanisms of your family members being outraged and suing you, or suing the corporation, of other members of society being horrified by what these corporations are doing, of governments themselves being pressured by loved ones to enact legislation against this, by the reality that most people will plan this decades in advance. I pointed out that you probably think of this day as you do your wedding, right? This means that you're not being bum rushed by corporations on the day. You've probably tried to figure all of this out before because you have seen instances of other people dying and all that. Then we talk about the fear of death. And to be clear, this team misrepresents us. Our argument was never about corpses on the street or about us not knowing for a fact that we are dying. Our argument was about the fact that in this world, you get constant reflections of death, meaning that you are constantly seeing people on their last day reflect upon their lives, their regrets, their wants, their sorrows. You see people you love do this, you see people on TV do this, you see your friends do this, you see your grandparents do this. And in this world, we highlight then what these regrets are. And overwhelmingly, these regrets will be, I did not spend enough time with those I love. I did not do enough to bring me joy. I lived my life in service of others. These are things that people account for now, but we put out of our minds because we never talk about them to someone face to face. This world is a world where people constantly do that. I will lastly talk about dignity. This team seems to think that dignity dies with the body, that if you cease all experiences, you cannot have any dignity more. This is untrue. In the status quo, we let people choose how their funerals will go. And if I were to desecrate a body, if I were to take a corpse and burn it if it wanted to be buried, or eat it when it did not want to be eaten, that is one of the worst things we can accord to a person. And that is because moral worth extends past the point of death. And this is because, as human beings, we deserve to bookend our lives. It is part of our identities, our differences between us and animals, that we are able to say goodbye to things, our loved ones, our childhoods, our activities like debate. We say goodbye. It is an absolute tragedy that in the status quo, no one can say goodbye to life, to the joy of living, to the grand project that is you. Now, this team assumes that this world will be a bad one for these people, that this last day will be bad, but they are deeply uncompetitive in this regard. Right now, your last day, all of you, will probably be spent in a hospital eating breakfast and then croaking. Just think about that. Just think about how undignifying that is, that you never get to say goodbye. This is the dignity we restore to you.